Wow.
Nummer 2.
Wow.
Before delving into the importance of height, I'm going to outline my face ranking system with regards to people who I would feature in PSL-themed videos and detail how height factors into overall rating. Level 1. PSL looks maxes. Anyone who reaches solid MTN or HTN level after significantly improving from their base looks level can be included in PSL-themed videos as PSL looks maxes. Level 2. Moggers. Moggers are anyone who is Chad light facially and not below 173 centimeters or high tier normie with top 5% height. Level 3. PSL demigods. This category is a step beneath true PSL gods. PSL demigods don't look out of place among certified PSL gods and can be labeled simply under the umbrella as PSL gods. This can include guys with minimal status so long as they are legitimate Chads or someone with Chad. Total looks value of Chad light plus top 5% height as well as guys with high status such as actors and sports stars. Since status moggers have enough people who are aware of them, a broader consensus on their looks level can be reached, whereas if you took a no-name guy of a similar looks level as these status moggers, there would be too much debate around whether they warrant inclusion in PSL good montages since very few people would be familiar with them. Status is a grey area where people become less objective in their ratings and inflate the looks of people they admire. Some people might ask why Cillian Murphy is a PSL demigod, despite the flaws he has of short height and upper eyelid exposure, but he has enough status whereby there's a consensus from a large enough number of people that his place in PSL god montage are warranted. Level 4. PSL gods. This includes anyone who is almost unanimously agreed upon being worthy of the label of PSL god. How far this list extends will vary for everyone. I include Jordan Barrett, even though I don't personally rate him that highly, but I can appreciate his PSL level and high regard in the community. A top 5% height high tier normie equals overall Chad light or Chad light total looks value. A top 5% height Chad light equals Chad total looks value or Chad TLV. I use top 5% loosely and dependent on the country, but if we take the average European man between 20 to 40 as being 180 centimeters, then 95th percentile would be 190.5 centimeters. Now let's ask, how much does height matter in real life? I also refer to objective aesthetics when talking about height rather than female preference, because height becomes irrelevant after a certain point to certain populations of women. Using a man of 192.5 centimeters as an example, people might believe that his value would be higher in a country where his height is more rare, meaning he height mobs more men. But paradoxically, he would do better in the countries where women have proven they've prioritized selection for taller men, while he would do worse relatively in the countries where the population remains short as a result of women not prioritizing selecting the taller men in their gene pool. Even though 190.5 centimeters is much more rare in Brazil than in the Netherlands, diminishing returns for height sets in way before 192.5 centimeters in Brazil, because women prioritize so many other traits ahead of height. However, 192.5 centimeters puts you right into the most desirable height range for girls in countries like the Netherlands who make height a trait they prioritize selecting over other traits. The exception to this can be if you are super tall and you're ethnically native to a country with a short average height, then your own girls can see it as a massive halo. But thinking that it's a way better decision to GMX to a country where the average male height is 170 centimeters rather than stay in your native country where the average height is 180 centimeters is overblown if you're 190 centimeters or more. Another topic I want to address is height inflation and the narrative that Zoomers are far taller than millennials. You constantly hear anecdotes of this, but the statistics don't support it, with the native Dutch already peaking in height with men born in 1980 being the tallest cohort in their population. I am 195 centimeters, and I think it is rarer to see Zoomers who are over 20 years old that are in my height range than it is to see millennials in my height range. People are just more likely to see young guys in larger groups than they are to see post-college age guys in large groups, and usually young guys who hang around in large groups will be the anti-sports player types who tend to be taller than average. So people see a group of 6 20-year-old guys that contains a 6'3" guy, a 6'2" guy, a couple of 6-footers with a couple of 5'10s, and they decide to extrapolate that to the entire Zoomer population to claim that the average Zoomer height is 6 foot to 6'1". Another point I want to make against height inflation is people overestimating their own and other people's heights. Since I am taller than the vast majority of the population, I have a good vantage point for seeing how various heights look in comparison to the average. My first impression when I see a guy who later confirms to me that they are 189 to 190 centimeters is that they look very tall, and that is the initial defining trait about them. I once lived with a guy who was 180 centimeters, and because I was so used to seeing him in close quarters, I never actually remembered seeing him from a distance, or seeing how he compared to the average person on the street. One day, I was walking down the street and I saw a guy walking towards me, and my initial thought when seeing him was that he was a pretty tall guy with tall proportions. As I got closer, I realized this guy was actually my housemate, and he was wearing slim-fit jeans and suit jacket that haloed his shoulders, and his proportions actually looked like those of a tall man as he had a lean frame. I had never seen him from a distance. Height mogging normies before, so this just goes to show how a height of 180 centimeters can be solid and even a halo if you have good proportions. I can also say that I have never seen a 175 centimeters guy with a good face and thought that his height was enough of a phalo to handicap him in dating. Being notably below average in height is more of a phalo than being notably above average in height is a halo. Which is why if you can pass as being in the height average range, which is still the case at 175 centimeters, you can get height mogged often, but it shouldn't count against you much if your face is good enough. A white pill for guys just below average height is that they can now beat out taller guys thanks to their face by using dating apps, and they can isolate the girls by meeting them for the first time in low-traffic venues as opposed to having to resort to nightclubs where their lack of height is more blatant due to receiving frequent haymogs.
Yep, I'm a pretty tall guy. Around the average people in my country, I definitely stick out.
Something comical I've seen is normies trying to claim that 6'4" isn't even that tall, as if being 97th percentile in height in the UK doesn't make you a major outlier. Remember, you need to get permission from frauding normies who apparently have 6'7" friends before you're allowed to qualify as being tall. Another trope from normies that I find comical is when normies mockingly say bro's height is his whole personality. To get recognition in a global market of competing for status, you need to use every strength that you have to your advantage. You have plenty of guys whose facial rarity is their entire personality and the sole reason they gain status. Why shouldn't a height mogger be able to build a persona or brand around their outlier height, so long as they meet the face threshold necessary for height halo to kick in and aren't delusional about their total looks value? An underrated element of height is that as you age, your face deteriorates, but your height doesn't deteriorate to any significant degree before 50. At 25, it may be a toss-up between who has more female appeal between a 5'10" Chad Light and a 6' for HTN. But by the time they've reached 40, both are going to look past their prime in the eyes of young women, so their difference in facial attractiveness will be negligible. But as focus is taken away from the face, their difference in total looks value will be far more dramatic. Since the 6'4" guy held onto his most mogger trait, which was his height, while the 5'10" guy lost his most mogger trait, which was his face, when you look at tall sports stars, it often seems like they barely age between 30 to 40 and basically hold onto their peak for way longer than average height guys, with the tall guys often taking longer to fully develop and reach their peak. Another benefit to height is that it has a novelty factor that doesn't wear off. After you go through puberty and realize how your final adult face looks, or after you have a glow up and improve your face, there is a novelty period where you enjoy your newfound looks, but this will wear off as you stop improving and reach your facial peak, which can only decline going forward as you age, which forces most people to settle down. The novelty from height, however, has a much greater lifespan. You never really get tired of height mogging. A good example of height never losing its novelty is when people say that you seem to get taller every time they see you. This means that the shock to the brain of seeing a height mogger maintains its potency forever.
How was it when you first met? Did you kind of immediately gel and think, yeah,
I was just looking up. She was like, hell, how tall are you? Like, honestly, he gets taller every time I see him. It's weird.
Something that you often hear coming from average or shorter guys is that if they were 6'4", they would be the ultimate slayer. However, they fail to realize that if they receive the growth hormone release necessary to allow them to grow to 6'4", they would have a completely different facial growth pattern, which would most likely reduce the attractiveness of the face they currently have. This isn't to say that tall men have worse faces. In fact, I will shortly argue why they don't. However, I do believe that the hormone release required to grow to a height like 6'4" can often have a negative impact on someone's facial growth pattern. This goes to show just how incredible the genetic package is of someone who goes to an exceptional height, while also maintaining an exceptional face. While people often argue over height versus face in terms of mogging, when it comes to the upper echelon of moggers, it's usually a case that height is face. In many sports, height is skill in the sense that height is a prerequisite to play unless you are an outlier or occupying an average height or a manlet-friendly position. I would argue that, among PSL gods, being average height isn't the norm, but it in fact makes you an outlier, while being legit short makes you even more of an outlier. When we consider that 68.3% of men will fall within one standard deviation above or below the average, meaning where the average is 180 centimeters, 68% of men will be between 170.5 centimeters to 187.5 centimeters. Then you would surely expect that around 70% of PSL gods would fall within that height range. But instead, we actually see that the most PSL gods exceed this height range and are 188 centimeters or 6 to plus. You could argue that the reason for this is because there is a minimum height requirement for modeling, and PSL gods tend to gain recognition through modeling. But I believe it's a case that the most genetically elite faces come in an all-round elite genetic package that includes mogger height. Most Hollywood actors over the past couple of decades were short to average height, but they still only managed to produce a handful of guys with PSL god-level faces. With TikTok, any exceptionally good-looking guy can get famous nowadays. So why aren't there more short to average height guys with Zac Efron level faces being discovered? The only good example I can think of is Damian Carter, and while I feel like you'll see a decent amount of average height guys with Chad light faces in the general population, average height guys don't tend to develop the upper echelon of aesthetics faces that exist within in the tall Chad genetic package, while average height guys are capable of reaching the pinnacle of facial averageness with 33% facial thirds and being heavily haloed by facial harmony. I believe it is the facial growth pattern most common in tall men that pushes a man's face from simply being aesthetic to peak masculinity and aesthetics. The reason for this is because having additional chin height takes them as far away from looking feminine or infantile as they can be. This is also why tall men tend to have faces that look better as they age, because their face relies more on masculinity and chin size, which is more permanent compared to guys relying on more feminine traits that quickly lose their glow as they age. Despite social media sometimes making it seem like height is the single most in-demand trait from a woman's perspective, with low IQ street interviews asking women if they'd rather a short good-looking guy or a tall ugly guy, as if opinions on hypotheticals coming from a woman's mouth have a shred of value.
Would you rather a tall, ugly guy or a shorter, handsome guy?
Too ugly.
What is your ideal man though?
Tall. Just tall, really. That'll do.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
He ticked every single box, but he's short. He's 5'7", but he ticks every single box. Or you get a guy who's like 6'2".
Yeah.
Whoa, I've not told you yet. About 5.
Okay, so I'm 6'1". What are you saying, B? Let's get involved on this.
Would you ever let him press you?
I don't think so. You're lovely though, but no thank you.
Okay, talk about your type.
Brunette, tall, handsome.
On the England team, who are we saying is your type?
Yeah, Phil Foden, 100%.
Okay, let's find your Phil Foden. Come on. Right, let's do it.
I believe that women actually undervalue height when it comes to selecting a partner. The reason I say this is because the heritability of height is extremely predictable, whereas the heritability of a top 1% face is way less predictable than the heritability of top 1% height. I would argue that a face in the high-tier normie range without any major failures is about the most predictable level of facial rarity that can be inherited. In other words, the chance of a high-tier normie father producing a high-tier normie son is way greater than the chance of a Chad-light father creating a Chad-light son, while a Chad father producing a Chad son is even rarer, because Chads are often just strokes of luck, with proof of this being that many Chad will have brothers that are mid-tier normie or even below. Something else that's worth noting is the theory that the best-looking men often get their looks from and resemble their mother more than their father, with women tending to have more averaged facial ratios than men. When a man has an attractive mother and bears a strong resemblance to her, it is probable that he has inherited these averaged ratios. Then adding masculinity on top of it is what creates a mogger. I am not saying that this is absolutely always the case, but if you look at low-tier normie or mid-tier normie fathers and sons, you will often see the son inherited most of the father's traits. Because of this theory, I believe that the highest probability of creating mogger offspring would be for a good-looking woman to have children with a tall male who is lacking in phalos and is high-tier normie facially, rather than an average height male who is chad-light facially. It would marginally increase the chances of producing a mogger son if a good-looking woman had children with a tall male who was chad-light facially, but tall chad-lights are exceedingly rare, so tall high-tier normies should be the most widely in demand men on the planet if women actually gave a shit about the fate of their male offspring. But this is a topic for another video. So what height is the ideal height? I think that being between 1 to 2 standard deviations above the average height is ideal, where the average height is 180 centimeters. 1.1 standard deviation above would be 188 centimeters or 6'2", while 2 standard deviations above would be 195 centimeters, which is a fraction under 6'5". 188 centimeters to 192 centimeters arca, 6'2" to 6'3" is ideal for the female gaze, while 193 centimeters to 195 centimeters is also ideal, but leaning more towards male gaze and mogging benefits. 195 centimeters is 98th percentile in a population with an average height of 180 centimeters. And I believe that's more than enough for height mogging purposes, but it's also normal enough that you can still somewhat blend in. I also think that if you are above 195 centimeters, it's almost automatically assumed that you should be using your height to your advantage in some sport, and if it's a case that you don't have any sporting achievements at that height, it's almost counted as a failure against you. If you had a significant physical advantage, but your coordination and mental sharpness was so weak that you still managed to fail at sport. Just like how ogre males will be likely to produce unattractive daughters, men in the extremely tall range of 198 centimeters plus are likely to produce daughters in the extremely tall range of 185 centimeters should they reproduce with an average height woman, or even taller if they decide to reproduce with a tall woman. Women who are extremely tall tend to have abused dog mindsets, and it is often these women who end up dating a subhuman guy out of sympathy, because they feel like they suffered from others being superficial towards them, so they should abandon being superficial when choosing a partner. Or there are also cases where tall women become giga standard cells demanding 6'6" chad, but end up alone because they can compete with compact high estrogen-bodied foggers. Although something to note is that gigatall fathers could be the key to producing peak facial aesthetic daughters, but I might explore this theory in a future video. I personally wouldn't want a daughter who is taller than 5'10", and it will be a balancing act finding the ideal height woman who can give you tall sons without giving you freakishly tall daughters. I also find it comical when people say that tall men having children with short women, or even just dating them, is ruining their genetics. A 5-foot woman will have superior offspring by having a child with a 6'4" man than she would have by having a child with her male height equivalent man of 5'5". In my opinion, no attractive tall man should settle for just one woman, and if we were living in line with nature, tall men would have harems and impregnate the majority of the female population all the way from the 5-foot women to the 6-foot women. This would allow for the greatest increase in population height if tall men actually monopolized the market and were constantly occupying every woman's womb with their seed. And on that final black pill, I would leave you. IND4. The self-glaze in this video was unreal.